I'm Davina, 17, female, but not for long. I live in a perfectly manicured suburban house with my parents and my younger brother, a place that looks idyllic from the outside, but feels more like a stage where only one actor gets the spotlight. I'm a high school senior, juggling classes and a part-time waitressing job to save up for a future that feels like my only escape. The story I'm about to tell you is how my own family decided my transition into adulthood was less important than my brother's fleeting feelings, and how that single act of cruelty finally gave me the strength to break free from their script. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Living in the shadow of a golden child is a strange, disorienting experience. It's not about outright neglect, not always. It's more subtle, like living in a room where the lights are always dimmed just enough so that you can see, but never enough to be truly seen. In my family, the sun didn't just shine on my brother, Derek. It was a custom-installed, high-wattage spotlight that followed him everywhere, leaving me in the perpetual twilight at the edges. Derek, at 16, was the star of the family. He was the captain of the debate team, a decent soccer player, and had a charm that could disarm anyone, especially our parents, Margaret and Craig. To them, Derek's achievements were monumental, his setbacks were tragic dramas, and his feelings were delicate artifacts to be preserved under glass. My achievements, on the other hand, were treated like expected line items on a budget report, noted but never celebrated. Getting straight A's was simply what I was supposed to do. Winning a regional art competition was a nice little hobby. My promotion to lead waitress at the diner was met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear. Just don't let it interfere with your real studies." The difference in their treatment of us was a constant, low hum of unfairness in our household. If Derek got a B on a test, it would trigger a family crisis meeting. My father, Craig, would sit him down, his brow furrowed with concern, offering to hire a tutor. My mother, Margaret, would cook his favorite meal to help him de-stress. If I got a B, I'd get a clipped, "You need to try harder, Davina, don't get lazy." When Derek wanted new soccer cleats, the best on the market, it was an immediate purchase, a necessary investment in his talent. When I needed a new laptop for school because my old one was on its last legs, it was a month-long negotiation about responsibility and budgets, ending only when I offered to pay for half of it with money I'd been saving for college. The house was a museum of Derek's accomplishments. His trophies gleamed on the mantelpiece, his debate team photos were framed on the walls, and his soccer jerseys were treated like sacred relics. My art, the few pieces I dared to show my parents, were tucked away in a portfolio in my closet, out of sight. It was as if any evidence of my own identity might distract from the main exhibit, the wonderful world of Derek. My parents weren't monsters in the traditional sense. They were just biased to a degree that was breathtakingly oblivious. My mother, Margaret, was a real estate agent obsessed with appearances. She loved to talk about my son, the debate captain, to her clients. It was a selling point, a testament to the wonderful family life one could have in the homes she sold. My father, Craig, a sales manager, saw Derek as a reflection of himself, confident, ambitious, a future leader. I, the quiet, artistic daughter, didn't fit into their polished narrative. I was the supporting character, the set dressing. The most painful part was that Derek knew it. He didn't just accept his golden child status, he wielded it. He knew he could get away with anything. He'd leave his chores for me to do, knowing that if I complained, I'd be the one accused of not being a team player. He'd borrow money from my wallet and, when confronted, would tell our parents I was being dramatic over a few dollars. They would always side with him, telling me to be more generous with my brother. "He's under a lot of pressure, Davina," my mother would say. "You should be more supportive." As my 18th birthday approached, I held onto a sliver of hope. 18. It was a milestone, a real undeniable landmark in a person's life. It felt too significant to be ignored, even by them. For months, I had been dreaming of what I wanted to do. It wasn't anything extravagant. I just wanted a small party with my few close friends and my Aunt Judith. Maybe we could have dinner at that Italian place downtown that I loved, the one with the fairy lights on the patio. I envisioned a simple cake, a few presents, and for one evening, the feeling of being the center of my family's attention. I had been dropping hints for weeks, talking about my friends, 18th birthday parties, mentioning the restaurant, circling the date on the kitchen calendar with a bright red marker. Each time, my mother would offer a vague, non-committal smile and say, "We'll see, dear, it's a busy time." I should have recognized the familiar chill of dismissal in her tone, but hope is a stubborn thing. I wanted to believe that this time would be different. This time, they would see me. A week before the big day, I decided to approach them directly. I found them in the living room, watching TV. Derek was sprawled on the other couch, glued to his phone. I took a deep breath, my heart thumping with a mixture of hope and dread. "Mom, Dad," I began, trying to keep my voice light and casual. Since my birthday is next Saturday, I was hoping we could finally make a plan. I'd really love to have that dinner at Giovanni's with a few friends and Aunt Judith. My father didn't even look up from the television. "We're a bit tight on cash this month, Davina." My mother, however, muted the TV and gave me her full attention, which was almost worse. Her expression was one of carefully constructed sympathy, the kind she used on clients when a deal was falling through. "Honey, we need to talk about that," she said softly. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Your father and I were discussing it, and we just don't think a celebration is a good idea right now." I stared at her, confused. "A good idea? It's my 18th birthday. Why wouldn't it be a good idea?" From the other couch, Derek snickered without looking up from his phone. That was my first clue. This had something to do with him. It always did. My mother, Margaret, sighed dramatically, as if I were forcing her to explain a complex and painful truth to a child. "Davina, you know how sensitive your brother is," she began, folding her hands in her lap. "He's been feeling a lot of pressure lately with the regional debate finals coming up, and honestly, he's just not in a celebratory mood." I blinked, trying to process the sheer absurdity of her statement. "Derek's mood? What does Derek's mood have to do with my birthday?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It's my 18th birthday. It's a one-time thing." My father, Craig, finally tore his eyes from the television, his expression annoyed, as if I were a buzzing fly he couldn't swat. "Don't be selfish, Davina," he said, his tone sharp. "Your brother is going through a lot. A big party for you right now would feel like we're rubbing his face in it." Rubbing his face in what? The fact that I was turning a year older on the day I was born. The logic was so warped, so utterly nonsensical, that for a moment I was speechless. Across the room, Derek looked up from his phone, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. He was the puppet master, and my parents were his willing marionettes. "I don't understand," I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't asking for a big party. I just wanted a simple dinner with my friends for my 18th birthday." Margaret reached over and patted my knee, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt condescending. "We know, honey, but Derek told us he's been feeling, well, a bit overlooked lately. He said that with all the focus on you turning 18, he doesn't feel very special." The words hit me like a physical blow. Derek, the boy whose every minor achievement was celebrated with the pomp and circumstance of a royal wedding, felt overlooked. Because his sister, the one who existed in his shadow, was about to have a single day dedicated to her, it was a level of entitlement so profound it bordered on delusional. And my parents were not only buying it, they were endorsing it. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice hardening as the shock gave way to a cold, rising anger. "You are canceling my 18th birthday celebration because my 16-year-old brother doesn't feel special enough." "We're not canceling it, Davina. That's such a dramatic way to put it," Craig interjected, his voice rising in irritation. "We are simply postponing any official celebration. We can do something small, just the four of us, maybe later in the month after Derek's competition is over and he's feeling better." "A quiet dinner at home," Margaret added, as if this were a generous compromise. "I'll make your favorite lasagna." Their favorite lasagna, not mine. I hated mushrooms, a fact I'd been reminding her of for a decade. The offer was a perfect metaphor for my entire life, a gesture that was supposedly for me, but was actually tailored to everyone else's preferences. The injustice of it all was suffocating. For years, I had quietly accepted my secondary role. I had watched them throw a lavish, Sweet 16 for Derek the year before, complete with a DJ, catering, and over 50 guests. I had smiled through countless dinners celebrating his soccer goals, his debate wins, his good report cards. I had never complained. I had waited patiently, believing that for my 18th, for this one legally and culturally significant milestone, my turn would finally come. And now, that turn was being stolen from me based on the manufactured emotional fragility of my brother. "No," I said, the word coming out stronger than I expected. "No, that's not fair." Craig's face darkened. He wasn't used to me pushing back. "Life isn't fair, Davina. It's time you learned that. Family means making sacrifices for each other." "I'm always the one making the sacrifices," I shot back, my voice cracking. "Everything is always about Derek. When has he ever sacrificed anything for me? When have you ever put my feelings before his?" Margaret gasped, placing a hand over her heart as if I'd wounded her. "That is a horrible thing to say. We love you both equally." The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that I almost laughed. They might have loved us, but it was far from equal. Their love for Derek was a vibrant, roaring fire, while their love for me was a pilot light, easily forgotten and prone to being extinguished by the slightest draft. "If you loved me equally, we wouldn't be having this conversation," I said, standing up. "You would tell Derek to stop being a spoiled brat and that the world doesn't revolve around him for one day." Derek, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, his voice dripping with faux innocence. "I can't help how I feel, Mom. I'm just being honest. I'm really stressed, and a big party for Davina just feels like a lot right now." It was a masterful performance. He was the victim, the sensitive soul crushed by the weight of his own potential. I was the selfish, demanding shrew who refused to accommodate his delicate sensibilities. My parents' faces softened as they looked at him, their expressions filled with pity and concern. In that moment, I saw with perfect, painful clarity that I had already lost. There was no argument I could make, no logic I could present, that would penetrate their wall of devotion to him. I looked from my mother's pitying face to my father's stern glare to my brother's triumphant smirk. The decision was made. There would be no party, no dinner, no acknowledgement. My 18th birthday would be just another Saturday, overshadowed by the needs of the golden child. "Fine," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a chilling sense of resignation. "Fine, don't do anything. It doesn't matter." I turned and walked out of the room, ignoring my mother's call of "Davina, don't be like that." I went up to my bedroom and closed the door, the sound echoing the closing of a chapter in my life. The one where I still believed my parents might one day see me as an equal. As I sat on my bed, the silence of my room felt heavier than ever. The faint hope I had been nurturing for months had been crushed, and in its place, a cold, hard resolve began to form. They thought they had the final say. They thought they could erase my milestone, make me invisible. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The uncelebration had been proclaimed, but my story was far from over. The days leading up to my birthday were filled with a tense, suffocating silence. My parents acted as if our conversation had never happened. They moved around me with a forced, cheerful normality, asking about my day at school or my shift at the diner, carefully avoiding any mention of the upcoming Saturday. It was a classic Margaret and Craig maneuver. If they ignored a problem long enough, they believed it would simply cease to exist. Derek, however, was less subtle. He floated around the house with an air of smug satisfaction, occasionally giving me a pitying look that was far more insulting than any overt gloating. He was the victor, and he was basking in his conquest. He had successfully convinced our parents to cancel my birthday, and now he was enjoying the spoils of his emotional manipulation, the undivided attention and sympathy of our parents. For my part, I responded with a quiet, icy civility. I answered their questions with one-word responses, ate my meals quickly, and spent most of my time either at work or locked in my room. The anger that had flared up during our confrontation had cooled into something harder and more enduring: resolve. They had dictated that there would be no celebration. Fine, but they couldn't control what I did outside the walls of their house. they couldn't stop me from celebrating myself. The idea came to me during a quiet moment at work. I was refilling salt shakers, the repetitive motion calming my racing thoughts when it hit me. I had money. I had been diligently saving for years, squirreling away every tip and a portion of every paycheck. My bank account, which I had opened myself the day I turned 16, was my secret stash, my escape fund. My parents knew I had a job, but they had no idea how much I had saved. They assumed it was for trivial tea. Naj things, clothes, movies, snacks. They had no idea it was for my future, for a life away from them. I had originally earmarked it for college expenses, for a deposit on a dorm room or for books. But a small portion of it could be used for something else. It could be used to give myself the 18th birthday they had denied me. A secret party for one. The plan began to take shape in my mind, a spark of defiance that quickly grew into a comforting flame. This wouldn't be the party I had originally dreamed of, with friends and family. This would be something more personal, more meaningful. It would be a declaration of my own worth. I called my Aunt Judith, my mother's younger sister and the only member of our family who seemed to see the toxic dynamic at play. Judith was everything my mother was not: independent, direct, and fiercely fair. She was a lawyer, and she had a finely tuned radar for injustice. I explained the situation to her in a hushed voice over the phone, my words tumbling out in a torrent of frustration and hurt. They canceled my birthday dinner, I told her, because Derek said it would make him feel less special. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Judith finally spoke, her voice was laced with a cold fury that I rarely heard. "Are you kidding me, Davina? That is the most ridiculous, self-absorbed thing I have ever heard, and Margaret and Craig are going along with it." "They said I was being selfish," I whispered, the shame of their accusation still stinging. "You are not selfish," Judith said firmly. "You are the least selfish person I know. They are being neglectful and enabling your brother's appalling behavior. This has gone on for far too long." Hearing her validate my feelings was like a balm on a raw wound. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," she continued. "What can I do?" "Actually," I said, a new confidence in my voice, "I have a plan, but I need your help to make it happen." My birthday arrived on a gray, overcast Saturday. In the morning, my parents' attempt at acknowledging the day was as pathetic as it was insulting. A single, unwrapped cupcake with a crooked candle sat on the kitchen counter next to a generic birthday card signed by both of them. Inside, my father had written, "Happy 18th. Love, Mom and Dad." There was no gift, no mention of any future celebration. This was it. This was their entire effort. Derek didn't even bother to say happy birthday. He just grunted as he grabbed the milk from the fridge, his eyes fixed on his phone. I looked at the sad little cupcake, a symbol of their minimal-effort affection, and felt nothing but a detached sense of finality. I picked it up, threw it in the trash, and walked out the door to my shift at the diner, a lie I had carefully constructed for my grand escape. The first stop was the bank. I walked up to the teller and, with a steady hand, withdrew a significant amount of cash from my savings. Holding the crisp bills in my hand felt empowering, like holding a ticket to a new life. From there, I went on a shopping spree, but not for frivolous things. I went to a store that sold quality luggage and bought a large, durable suitcase and a matching carry-on. Then I went to a department store and bought practical things I would need: new towels, bedding, a set of dishes, and basic toiletries. I was not just buying things for a day, I was buying the building blocks of my independence. My final stop was a small, independent bookstore I loved. I spent an hour browsing the shelves, a sense of peace settling over me for the first time in weeks. I bought myself a stack of books by my favorite authors, not as a simple birthday present, but as an investment in my own happiness and intellectual freedom. Then, I went to a bakery and bought myself a small, elegant cake, one with raspberry filling and cream cheese frosting, my actual favorite. It was the anti-cupcake, a beautiful, deliberate choice made just for me. My last and most important errand was meeting Aunt Judith. She was waiting for me at a coffee shop on the other side of town. When I walked in, carrying my shopping bags, she stood up and enveloped me in a huge hug. "Happy birthday, my brilliant, strong girl," she whispered. She had a large envelope in her hand. "Here," she said, sliding it across the table. "This is your gift, but it's also your ammunition." I opened it. Inside were documents, financial aid forms for colleges out of state, apartment application forms, and a lease agreement for a small studio apartment just a few blocks from her own place. She had already paid the first month's rent and the security deposit. "It's yours if you want it, Davina," she said, her eyes serious. "No pressure, but I want you to know you have a safe place to land. You don't have to live in that house a second longer than you have to." Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at the keys she placed on top of the lease. This was more than a gift. It was a lifeline. It was freedom. My secret party, for one, was turning into a full-blown Independence Day. That evening, as I sat in my new, empty apartment with Aunt Judith, the reality of my decision began to sink in. We ate slices of my raspberry cake directly from the box with forks, the sweet taste a delightful contrast to the bitterness of the day. The apartment was small, just a single room with a tiny kitchen and a separate bathroom, but it felt like a palace. It was mine. The air was still, quiet, and blessedly free of the oppressive weight of my family's expectations and Derek's ego. As we talked, Judith helped me connect the dots of a lifetime of slights, pain. Ting a picture that was clearer and more damning than I had ever allowed myself to see. I had always known, on some level, that Derek was the favorite, but I had internalized it as a personal failing. Maybe I wasn't outgoing enough, or athletic enough, or charming enough. I had always assumed the fault lay with me. Judith, with her sharp legal mind and her outsider's perspective, methodically dismantled that notion. "This isn't about you, Davina," she said, her voice firm. "This has never been about you. It's about them. It's about their own insecurities and their narrow vision of what success looks like." She started with the small things, memories I had almost forgotten. She reminded me of my 5th-grade science fair. I had spent weeks building a working model of a volcano, complete with baking soda and vinegar for a spectacular eruption. I had won first prize. When I brought the blue ribbon home, bursting with pride, my father had glanced at it and said, "That's nice, but did you hear Derek scored 2 goals in his soccer game today?" My victory was immediately eclipsed. The ribbon ended up in a drawer, while a blurry photo of Derek kicking a ball was framed and placed on the mantel. Then there was the time I got the lead in the high school play in my sophomore year. I had practiced for months, memorizing every line until it was second nature. My parents attended the opening night, but they left during the intermission. When I asked them why later, my mother said, "Oh, honey, it was running a bit long, and Derek had an early morning practice. We had to get him home to bed." They hadn't even stayed to see my final monologue, the scene I had worked on the hardest. Derek's sleep schedule was deemed more important than my moment in the spotlight. Judith then brought up something I had completely blocked out: the family vacation fund. For years, my parents had a jar in the kitchen where they collected spare change and cash for a future trip to Disney World. My brother and I were encouraged to contribute our allowance money. I had diligently put in $1 or $2 every week. When I was 14, I got my first part-time job bussing tables and started contributing more significant amounts, dreaming of seeing the famous castle. A year later, the jar was suddenly empty. When I asked my parents about it, they told me they had to use it for an unexpected expense. A few weeks later, Derek showed up with a brand new, top-of-the-line gaming computer, something he had been begging for. My father proudly explained that it was an investment in his future, claiming it could help with school projects. They had taken the vacation fund, including all the money I had personally contributed, and spent it entirely on a toy for Derek. They never paid me back or apologized. They just expected me to understand. Listening to Judith recount these events, one after another, was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Each memory was a piece of wreckage, and together they formed a scene of utter devastation. It wasn't just a matter of my parents loving Derek more. It was a consistent, deliberate pattern of devaluing my interests, my achievements, and my contributions. My passions, like art and theater, were dismissed as hobbies, while Derek's, like debate and soccer, were treated as serious, pre-professional endeavors. My financial contributions were absorbed into the family pot and repurposed for his benefit, while he was never expected to contribute anything. The financial aspect was particularly galling. As we talked, I started doing a rough calculation in my head. The laptop I had to help pay for, the vacation fund money that was never returned. The countless times I had used my own earnings to buy things for myself that they had readily bought for Derek. I realized with a jolt that my parents hadn't just emotionally neglected me. They had been financially exploiting me for years, using my responsible nature and my income to further subsidize their golden child. It's a classic case, Judith explained, leaning forward. Craig sees Derek as a mini version of himself, a do-over. He's projecting all his own ambitions onto him, and your mother, Margaret, is obsessed with the image of a perfect family. A star athlete and debate champion son fits that image perfectly. A quiet, artistic daughter doesn't give her the same bragging rights at her open houses. It was cold and clinical, but it made a terrible kind of sense. I wasn't a daughter to them in the same way Derek was a son. I was an accessory, one that didn't quite match the decor. The birthday cancellation wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 18 years of this toxic dynamic. It was the moment the pattern became so obvious that even I could no longer deny it. They weren't just thoughtless. They were actively choosing to sacrifice my happiness for Derek's comfort, time and time again. They had taught him that his feelings were paramount, and that mine were. Irrelevant. They had created the very monster of entitlement whose whims now ruled their lives. As the evening wore on, my grief began to morph into a cold, clear-eyed anger. The hurt was still there, but it was now fuel. I wasn't just a victim of their favoritism anymore. I was a survivor of it, and I was done. I was done being the family shock absorber, the one who was expected to quietly endure the unfairness. I was done funding my own neglect. Sitting there in the quiet sanctuary of my new apartment, I made a promise to myself. I would not just leave. I would leave on my own terms. They had denied me an 18th birthday celebration, a rite of passage into adulthood. So I would give them a different rite of passage, one they would never forget. My official entry into adulthood would be marked not by a party, but by a reckoning. My plan, which had started as a simple act of defiance, began to evolve into something much bigger. It was time to show them the true cost of their golden child. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in stealth operations. I lived a double life. By day, I was the sullen, withdrawn daughter, going through the motions at home. I did my chores, I went to school, and I worked my shifts at the diner. I kept my interactions with my family brief and superficial, a strategy that, to my surprise, they seemed to prefer. My quiet compliance was easier for them to handle than my anger. They likely interpreted my silence as me getting over it, a sign that their world was returning to its comfortable, Derek-centric orbit. They had no idea that every evening after my shift, I wasn't going to a friend's house or the library. I was going to my apartment. Piece by piece, I was moving my life out of their house. It started with the small things, the sentimental items they would never notice were gone. My portfolio of artwork, my favorite books, a box of old photographs, the jewelry my grandmother had left me. I smuggled them out in my backpack, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration each time I walked out the door. Aunt Judith was my co-conspirator. She helped me furnish the apartment on a budget, scouring online marketplaces for a used bed frame, a small table, and a comfortable chair. We spent an evening assembling the furniture, the quiet work of building my new life, a deeply therapeutic process. She also helped me with the logistics of adulthood. We opened a new bank account at a different bank, and I rerouted my direct deposit from the diner to it. We went over my budget, calculating my monthly expenses and figuring out how many shifts I would need to work to be completely self-sufficient. It was daunting, but for the first time, I felt in control of my own destiny. The biggest challenge was moving my clothes and larger possessions. I did it incrementally. I would pack a duffel bag with clothes and drop it off at the apartment on my way to work. I told my parents I was donating old clothes to a charity drive to explain the emptying of my closet. They barely noticed. Their attention was, as always, focused elsewhere. The regional debate finals were approaching, and the entire household was consumed by Derek's big week. My mother cooked his favorite brain food meals, and my father ran mock debate sessions with him in the living room every night. I was a ghost in my own home, which, for my purposes, was perfect. During this time, I also began to compile an inventory, not just of my possessions, but of my financial contributions to the family over the years. I went through my old bank statements, which I had thankfully saved. I calculated the money from the Disney fund, the half I had paid for the family laptop that Derek now exclusively used, the money I'd spent on my own school supplies and clothes that they had always provided for him. I even tallied up a conservative estimate of the borrowed cash Derek had taken from my wallet over the years, the amounts they had always dismissed as trivial. I wrote it all down on a single sheet of paper, creating a detailed, itemized invoice. The final number was shocking, far more than I had anticipated. It was a tangible representation of the imbalance that had defined my life. This invoice became the centerpiece of my plan. It wasn't about getting the money back. I knew I never would. It was about confrontation. It was about forcing them to see, in black and white, the cost of their choices. The final piece of my plan involved my car. It was a 10-year-old sedan, reliable but far from fancy. It had been a gift from my grandmother, left to me in her will. The title was legally in my name, a fact for which I was eternally grateful. It was my one significant asset, my ticket to freedom. My parents, however, treated it like a family car. My father used it on weekends when my mother needed her car, and Derek was constantly asking to borrow it to go out with his friends, a request my parents always pressured me to grant. I had always resented this, but now I saw it as an opportunity. The day before Derek's debate final, I executed the final stage of my move. I called in sick to my diner shift. While my parents were at work and Derek was at school, I packed the last of my things, my bedding, my remaining toiletries, my desk lamp. I loaded everything into my car. As I took one last look around the room that had been my cage for 18 years, I felt a pang of sadness, not for what I was leaving behind, but for the childhood I should have had. But that sadness was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. There was no turning back now. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was electric with anticipation for Derek's big day. My father was quizzing him on potential rebuttal arguments, and my mother was carefully ironing his suit. They were so consumed that they didn't even notice I was unusually quiet or that my closet was nearly empty. I sat at the dinner table, pushing food around my plate, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the Last Supper. Tomorrow, everything would change. After dinner, Derek approached me, a rare occurrence. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual, "I need to borrow your car tomorrow morning. I want to get to the tournament early to scope out the competition." It was the perfect setup. "Sure," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The keys are on the hook by the door." He smiled, a flash of the charm that always worked on our parents. "Thanks, you're the best." "I know," I replied, looking him directly in the eye. The double meaning was lost on him, of course. He just nodded and walked away, completely oblivious. I went to bed early that night, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house, a house that was no longer my home. I was a guest, a spy, waiting for the dawn. My quiet declaration of independence was complete. All that was left was the noise. The morning of the debate tournament was a whirlwind of frantic energy. My mother was making a special winner's breakfast for Derek, while my father paced. The kitchen offering last-minute words of encouragement. "Remember to project, son. Confidence is key. Make eye contact with the judges." It was all so painfully predictable. I quietly made myself a piece of toast and drank a glass of water, feeling like an anthropologist observing a strange tribal ritual. Derek came downstairs dressed in his suit, looking smug and self-important. "All right, I'm heading out," he announced to the room. "Wish me luck." "Good luck, sweetie." "We'll be there in an hour to watch the final round," my mother called after him. He grabbed the keys from the hook and walked out the front door. I counted the seconds in my head. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The front door opened again. Derek stood there, his face a mask of confusion. "Hey, where's your car?" he asked, looking at me. "I don't know, Derek. Where did you last see it?" I replied, taking a calm sip of my water. "It's not in the driveway," he said, his voice starting to edge with panic. "I need to go," my father stepped in. "What's going on, Davina? Where's your car?" "I moved it," I said simply. "Moved it where? For heaven's sake, your brother is going to be late." Craig snapped, his face turning red. I moved it to my new apartment, I said, placing my water glass down gently on the counter. I stood up and faced them. The moment had arrived. Your new apartment. Margaret repeated, her voice a confused squeak. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out 2 folded pieces of paper. I handed one to my father and one to my mother. The first was a copy of the lease for my new apartment, with my name and Aunt Judith's as a co-signer. The second was the itemized invoice I had so carefully prepared. I moved out last night, I announced to the stunned room. As of today, I am a legal adult, and I am financially independent. I will be supporting myself from now on. My father stared at the invoice, his eyes scanning the list of expenses, his mouth hanging slightly open. My mother was still stuck on the first document. Lease, Judith, what is this? Is this some kind of joke? It's not a joke, I said, my voice clear and strong. It's my 18th birthday present to myself. It's called self-respect. Derek, realizing the full implication of the situation, completely lost it. You did this on purpose. You're trying to sabotage my tournament. I'm going to be late, he shrieked, his confident demeanor shattering into childish rage. This has nothing to do with your tournament, Derek, I said, turning to him. This has to do with the fact that our parents decided that your fleeting feelings were more important than my 18th birthday. You didn't want me to feel special. Well, I decided to make myself feel special. I decided to give myself the gift of a life where I'm not constantly reminded that I'm second best. I then turned my attention back to my parents, who were now looking at the invoice, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. That number, I said, pointing to the total at the bottom of the page, is a conservative estimate of the money I have contributed to this family, and more specifically to Derek's lifestyle over the past 4 years. Money that was never acknowledged, let alone repaid. I don't expect to get it back. I just want you to see it. I want you to see the cost of your blatant favoritism, written down in dollars and cents. My father finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation. This is absurd. We gave you everything. You gave Derek everything, I corrected him calmly. You gave me the leftovers. You gave me the responsibility of an adult while treating me like an inconvenient child. You taught me that my hard work would be used to reward his mediocrity. You taught me that my feelings didn't matter. So, I'm taking all those lessons and putting them to good use. My mother started to cry, the manipulative tears I had seen her use so many times before. Davina, how could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you, we love you. You have a funny way of showing it, I replied, my voice devoid of the emotion I thought I would feel. There was no anger left, just a profound, empty sadness. You love the idea of a daughter, but you don't actually see the one standing in front of you. I walked to the front door and picked up my backpack, which contained the last of my personal items. As for the car, I said, looking at Derek, it's mine. The title is in my name. You will not be using it anymore. You and Dad can figure out how you're getting to your precious tournament. Derek's face was a mess of fury and panic. Mom, Dad, do something, he wailed. But for the first time, they seemed paralyzed. They were staring at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as their quiet, compliant daughter, but as a stranger, an independent adult who had just systematically dismantled their entire world order. I opened the door. Happy 18th birthday to me, I said softly, more to myself than to them. And tea. I walked out, closing the door behind me on my old life. I didn't run. I walked calmly down the driveway to the street, where my car was parked a block away. As I got in and started the engine, I didn't look back. The rearview mirror was for seeing what was behind you, and I was only interested in the road ahead. The first few weeks of living on my own were a whirlwind of terrifying and exhilarating freedom. The quiet of my small apartment was, at first, deafening. I was so used to the constant background noise of my family. The television blaring, Derek shouting at a video game, my parents' hushed arguments, that the silence felt unnatural. But slowly, I began to fill it with my own sounds. Music that I loved, the hum of the kettle as I made tea, the scratch of my pencil on paper as I sketched. I was the master of my own environment, and the feeling was intoxicating. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, and the work which had once felt like a chore now felt empowering. Every dollar I earned was mine. It went toward my rent, my groceries, my future. There were no hidden taxes, no diversions to the Derek Fund. I was building a life, my life, from the ground up. Aunt Judith was my rock during this transition. She checked in on me regularly, not to hover, but to offer support and guidance. She helped me navigate the complexities of utility bills and renter's insurance, treating me not as a child who needed saving, but as an adult who deserved respect. She never once said, "I told you so." She just provided a safe space for me to process the emotional fallout of my departure. My parents, predictably, did not handle my absence well. In the immediate aftermath, there was a flurry of angry voicemails and texts. My father, Craig, accused me of being ungrateful and selfish, of trying to ruin Derek's most important day. My mother, Margaret, sent long, tearful messages, begging me to come home and talk things through, insisting it was all a huge misunderstanding. I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing left to say. I had said it all with my invoice and my empty room. Interestingly, I learned from Aunt Judith that Derek had indeed been late to his debate tournament. My father had to drive him, and in their panic and anger, they got stuck in traffic and missed the registration deadline. He was disqualified without even getting to compete. The golden child, for once in his life, faced a consequence that his parents couldn't fix. The fallout from this was apparently spectacular. Derek threw an epic tantrum, blaming me, my father, the traffic, and the tournament organizers, everyone but himself. The crown he had worn so comfortably for 16 years had been knocked askew, and he didn't know how to handle it. About a month after I left, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was shocked to see her standing in the hallway, looking lost and diminished. She had got my address from Judith, who had reluctantly given it to her after my mother wore her down with frantic calls. I let her in, and she looked around my small, tidy space, her eyes lingering on the artwork I had finally hung on the walls. "It's clean," she said, as if she had expected me to be living in squalor. She tried to reconcile, offering a series of weak apologies and promises that things would be different if I came home. "We miss you, Davina," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The house is so quiet without you." "It was quiet with me too, Mom," I replied gently. "You just never noticed." I explained to her that I wasn't coming back. I wasn't doing it to punish them, but for my own well-being. "I'm happy here," I told her, and the surprising thing was I truly meant it. "I'm building a life for myself, a life where I'm not invisible." She didn't seem to understand. She saw my independence not as a sign of strength, but as a rejection of her. She left in tears, and while a part of me felt a pang of guilt, a larger part of me felt a sense of peace. The dynamic was broken. I could no longer be manipulated by her tears or my father's anger. The real turning point came a few months later. I had applied to several out-of-state colleges for their art programs, and I had been accepted into my top choice with a partial scholarship. Aunt Judith helped me with the financial aid paperwork, and with my savings and a student loan, I was able to make it work. I was really going to escape. The news seemed to finally break through my parents' denial. My father called me, and for the first time there was no anger in his voice, only a weary resignation. He asked about my plans, about the school, about where I would live. It was the most normal conversation we had had in years. He didn't apologize, I knew he never would, but he did say something that stuck with me. "Your aunt says you're doing well, that you're happy." "I am," I said. There was a long pause. "Good," he said, and then he hung up. It wasn't an absolution, but it was an acknowledgement. In his own limited way, he was letting me go. I never did have a big 18th birthday party. My real celebration was the day I packed my car, and drove off to college. It was the quiet satisfaction of paying my own bills, of making my own decisions, of creating art that mattered to me, even if it only ever hung on my own walls. I still have a relationship with my parents, but it's a distant one, conducted through occasional phone calls and holiday cards. They are still pouring all their energy and resources into Derek, who, from what I hear, is struggling in college, unequipped to handle a world that doesn't revolve around him. The crown has fallen, and he doesn't know how to pick it up. Sometimes I feel sad for the family I never had, but I am profoundly grateful for the life I have built. They forbade me from celebrating the day I became an adult, but in doing so, they gave me the greatest gift of all, the motivation to truly become one. They wanted to keep me in the shadows, but they only forced me to find my own light. And from where I'm standing, the future looks incredibly bright.